Imagine a world where more women had the time to fully explore their genius. Welcome to She Rebel Radio, the UK's podcast for women ready to explore their genius. We've been celebrated for counter status quo ideas and a whole dose of feminine perspective. We are back with a special episode of She Rebel Radio discussing the life and work of Frida Kahlo with Ali Ray, director of Frida, the exhibition on screen film. Ali and I had a great chat in the Ladies' Loo at a restaurant in Brighton. We're going to restart that conversation and share it with you here on the podcast. This episode is in collaboration with Brighton On The Inside, an independent and curated lifestyle magazine who will also be writing an editorial piece. So make sure you check out that too. Ali, it's amazing to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm really well. Thank you for having me. I'm really delighted we could pick up that conversation from the loos.
Yeah, me too. And just to give context to our listeners, we met in the toilets at a Mexican restaurant, Choza in Brighton, for a celebratory event ahead of your re-release of the Frida film and the major exhibition of Frida's work opening at the Tate in June. Do you want to tell our listeners what we were doing at Choza?
Well, yes, it was lovely because we were having a bit of a celebration about the relaunch of the film. And the relaunch is because when I made the original film, its release date hit middle of 2020. And obviously cinemas were closed, and as things were beginning to open up, you could only go to the cinema and sit sort of 5 seats apart from people. So we have decided to re-release the film in line with the amazing Tate Modern exhibition that's opening in June, and that's called Frida, the Making of an Icon, looking at how this artist from Mexico is on every tote bag, pillow. There's probably most of our houses will have some little hint of Frida somewhere, and that exhibition looks at why. So it was a good opportunity to add a little extra onto the original film featuring this new exhibition.
Yeah.
And Brighton, because the production company that make all these wonderful exhibition on screen films are based in Brighton.
Yeah, it's amazing that the team's based in Brighton. And you went to university at Sussex. I did my postgrad at Sussex University as well. So you've got links here. And why do you think Brighton resonates with the work of Frida?
I mean, I think if Frida was a town, Frida would be Brighton. I think Brighton, I lived in Brighton for years. I stayed after uni, and I love the spirit and the vibe of Brighton, and particularly that counterculture. I always see it as the counterculture capital of the UK. And Brighton, I think, lets you be who you want to be. I think Brighton is very I don't know, colourful. You just look at that evening or that afternoon when we were launching the film. There could not have been more colour in that restaurant, in people's dress sense. Yeah, Frida is a walking Brighton almost in terms of supporting some activism, feminism. There's all the elements of Frida's personality. You will find a comfortable home in Brighton, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and she's been a queer icon over the years as well. And as a Brightonian growing up here, I went to university in Manchester, but what we call a Brightonian, which
Yeah.
people often say to me these days, God, it's really rare. I didn't appreciate, that counterculture that I grew up in and how
Yeah.
acceptable, how people want to live their lives is until I left Brighton. I was like, oh wow, this is an issue
Yeah.
in other places.
100%. And the same thing, I suppose, going to university there, and I think I lived there for about 15 years afterwards, and that's it. You begin the Brighton way of life, or even for me as a comer inner, it seeps into you, and it is quite shocking when you go somewhere else and realize the views people have, or how uncomfortable people are maybe with different lifestyle choices. And well, Brighton will always be in my heart.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think we try and lead from the heart in Brighton. And you're based in Somerset now, I believe. Do you make it back to Brighton regularly? And how did your relationship with Exhibition on Screen come about? Do you make films just with them or a wider context?
Well, so my journey into sort of filmmaking started at Sussex University. I did do communications, culture, and media degree way back in the early 90s. And the very first job I got was with a company called Seventh Art Productions that were based in Dew Street in Brighton at the time. And I started working with them because I'd finished my media law exam, very last exam, last university date, and I was walking out thinking, "Oh my God, I haven't even thought about a job." And went into the careers unit for the very first time and saw a little bit of paper that said local production company needs a runner for 3 months. And I thought, and they put a telephone number, and I thought, "Oh, I'll have that." So I took that and I took a bit of paper and I rang them and ended up working with Seventh Art, who produced the exhibition on screen series, though they didn't at the time. And I ended up working my way up from a runner. I would sit in late in the evenings on the edits, and they were really good at mentoring me. And I think that was the real benefit of being in a small company. People gave me a lot of time. I asked lots of questions. I ended up being a researcher, a production assistant. And then I think in my mid 20s, I was able to direct my very first art series
Yeah.
about the Impressionists, and that went out on Channel 5 back in the day. And that's where my connection with art and exhibition on screen really started. The actual exhibition on screen for cinema didn't start till much later. That was in the early 2020s, and I think they've made about mid 40s of films, maybe 46 films now, all featuring really great artists or great exhibitions that people might not otherwise get to go and see. Exhibition on screen makes beautiful films that you can sit in a cinema undisrupted and really look at art and listen to the curators or the historians telling you the stories of those pieces or telling you the stories of the artist. And it's a really indulgent, wonderful way to spend an hour and a half. So I've gone from making these 23-minute films or programs for Channel 5 on art to making 90-minute films for cinema.
Yeah, with that real depth, and I love again, Brighton's such a creative city, isn't it?
Yeah.
And everyone's got a creative project on the side, or whether that's being a musician or a writer or podcasting or whatever it is. And I love
Exactly that.
yeah, and I love you took that piece of paper. You wouldn't be able to do that now.
No, of course I wouldn't be able to do that now, but, sometimes you just got to I think using your intuition.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
you're
yeah.
right about Brighton. We have access to so many creative people, and, for example, what I love about, being able to make these exhibition on screen films is that they really support things like, I am able to use a composer for every single film and have original music rather than just having to use sort of free library music, which often we'd be pushed to do. But I work with a composer. In fact, the one I work with, a guy called Asa Bennett, he lives in Brighton. And, we worked, I'll show him a sort of a sequence that I've made. I'll tell him what the narrative is going to be or the mood that I want. And, together, with all those elements, he'll then create beautiful pieces of music. And yeah, he'll do that for many of the films. And I just think, yeah, yeah, good old Brighton. Anything you need creatively, there's someone on the doorstep that will step forward and help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually grew up in an independent record shop in Brighton, so surrounded by music and creativity. And I first met Frida in around 1982 at the Hayward Gallery in London when I was in a
Mm.
pushchair, which is why when my mum actually discovered her work, which we were talking about the other day, and
Yeah,
she then became a face in our household, which was a little bit ahead of the time of her being as iconic as she is now.
yeah.
When and how were you first introduced to the work of Frida?
Well, it's a good question you put to the work of Frida because that's a key thing. I think I've for as long as I can remember, I had been aware of Frida's face, that image on, in popular culture. And therefore, when I was approached by Exhibition on Screen to make a film, a serious art film about her art, I did think, ooh, how much do I know about her art? nothing. And then I started to ask around to people who say, "Oh, I love Frida." And I'd say, "What do you love about Frida?" And then they would talk about her her as an icon in one way or another.
Yeah.
They would pick one of her many identities as to whether, they appreciated, that she'd stood up for her feminist values, or, what she achieved with a life of pain and disability, or people would pick things like that, but they would never pick her art. And so I started to look at Carlo's art in real depth, and realized that a lot of the images that we see of Frida on, you know, fabrics and lunch boxes and things are actually not her own artworks. They're sort of reproductions and maybe graphic versions of photographs taken by a guy called Nicholas Marai, who was one of her lovers. Um, and it's the photographs that everyone seems to know. So it gave a lot of joy and purpose to me, I suppose, making that film. I felt like I was revealing so much of who she actually was to an audience, because I was able to really dig in and look at her art. And I spent about 9 months researching, speaking to historians, scholars, curators, reading everything I could get my hands on. And some of Carlo's very early paintings, I'm thinking of one in particular when she just married Diego Rivera, and she'd painted a painting called, I think, Frida and Diego. And it almost looked like, I say this carefully, it was it looked like a child could have done it. It was very sort of bold color, obviously bold colors, flat, almost cartoon-like in a way. And I remember thinking, it was one of the first things I looked at, and I thought, "Oh, am I going to be able to make a 90-minute film on art like this?" And realizing, obviously, a few months later, having done all the study, is she very purposefully made kind of folk art for a while. What she was doing was trying to bring back the sort of art style of her Mexican heritage. That's how people had painted, and that's how people communicated. And she was copying that style. She was making a statement of, I am celebrating my Mexican heritage. I'm celebrating Mexican folk art. And you suddenly realize all of the layers of Carlo. Obviously, her art went on to be, there was what people described as surrealist, and she kicked back and said, "That's not surrealism. This is just what's in my head."
Yeah, she said it was her reality, didn't she? And can I just say, and I'm skipping slightly ahead, but
Yeah.
it's fairly common, isn't it, for female artists to be known for something other than their work. Look, when we were in the toilets, we were talking about Lee Miller, and she was
Mm.
known for being the muse, and of Man Ray, and for all the people that she hung out with, the surrealist Pablo Picasso, Roland Penrose, her husband. And I've had Amy, her granddaughter, on She Rebel Radio, who
Ah,
said,
yes.
it was only in the last, and we did that episode around 2020, actually, probably around the time you're doing this film, that it's only around now that we can talk about her in her own right as an artist,
Yeah.
and her actual 60,000 photographs that she took, rather than being a beautiful
Yeah.
woman that hung
Yep.
around with the male artists.
That's so true, and I feel that, I mean, if you look at all the films that Exhibition on Screen have made. We've, made, Monet and Renoir and Caravaggio. Just a simple thing, we use their surnames. Um, we refer to her as Frida. It often happens with, female artists particularly. They're feminized immediately, or they're set apart. We treat them slightly different.
Yeah,
We
it's
treat
the
the
same
two
with Lee,
differently.
isn't it? Although Lee,
Yeah,
she used Lee, and people thought she was
a
a
man.
guy, which she used to her
E-
advantage.
exactly, and had to do that. And there's lots of examples in history where women artists have had to dress up as men in order to get access to various places. Like, I'm trying to think, I can't remember the name of the artist now in the National Gallery, who painted horse fairs and things way back in the sort of the 1800s. but she wouldn't have been allowed to go there as a woman on her own, so she had to dress up as a man.
Yeah,
So, you come across this all the time in
yeah,
art, particularly art history. I mean, the thing I love about Frida is that she painted from a place where women were sort of told to hide. So she painted things like miscarriage, heartbreak, illness, surgery, infertility, rage, physical pain, and they're not polite subjects.
no,
And they're also not the subjects that sort of male-dominated art world was particularly interested in taking seriously. And that's where Frida, you know, why we should sit up and take notice of her as an artist. She made subjects like that, women's subjects, monumental.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
she put the private sort of experience of women into art. And to me, regardless of her incredible talent as an artist, being able to, put things on canvas, the fact that she used those subjects, to me, it's yeah, I just think go girl.
yeah, yeah. I was watching, the preview of your film earlier, and and I'll ask you in a minute what your favorite painting is and why. And I think, I think that's something, with the tote bags and things like that. My mum gets incredibly frustrated because she knows
Mm,
her work so well, and I grew up with the privilege of knowing it, to a certain degree, but needed a certain degree of maturity to realise the impact.
yeah, yeah,
And when I was watching your film, the painting of My Nurse and I mean, how
yeah,
iconic that is with Frida as the baby,
yeah,
feeding off an indigenous woman who is
yeah,
depicted as Mother Mary, and she is put herself as Jesus. That is so rebellious as a female artist. I
yeah.
again just had that, oh my God, the depth of her work still, I've known her work my whole life, still takes my breath away, really, as to
You're
how important and iconic it is and it was.
Exactly, and e there are that's the thing, there are so many layers. I mean, part of her sort of political action was her art in trying to reclaim Mexican culture, away from European culture. And, she actually changed her birth date, so that she was born in the year of beginning of the revolution. Those things were so important to her. And, it is I never want to say that, people sometimes say, "Oh, all her art is biographical." And I think, yes, it is, but there are other layers. There are other things that she so cleverly and intelligently brings in. Um, so that painting, for example, yes, she's, bringing back that, making references to, the culture. And there is a biographical element too, where she painted that painting when her husband had an affair with her sister, and her sister was the closest confidant that Frida had, and the betrayal, as you can imagine, was off the scale. And she also is making reference to the fact that her sister was very close to her in age, and when Carlo, was quite young, still a babe in arms, needing to be nursed, her sister was born, and so the mother gave Carlo to, an indigenous wet nurse. So her sister replaced Carlo in her mother's arms, and then obviously replaced Carlo in her husband's arms. And when you know that, you realize that this painting is Carlo being able to not express in words, but express in this incredible sort of visually arresting, confronting painting, that she's managing to express all of that within still thinking about, the other things, the wider things in the world that's important to her.
Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? The personal depth of that, and then the collective depth of it
Mm,
as well. And it's visually jarring, isn't it?
yeah,
And again, particularly for that time, a woman
yeah,
openly breastfeeding. Um,
yep.
and yeah, there's just so many layers to it. What would you say is your favorite? I know it's a really difficult question.
Well, I mean, there are a few. The one I sort of when I'm asked that question, I think the one that I had the most sort of breathtaking kind of moment with, is called Broken Column, and that's I mean, a real privilege I'm very aware of doing this job is that I get to be in all the best galleries and museums around the world at night when there's nobody else there. So I get to stand in front of these incredible artworks, not jostling for space, and I have peace and quiet, and I can stand, whilst the camera crew are around setting things up. And I was in the Dolores Olmedo museum in Mexico City, and we were, in fact, about to go and film, my nurse and I. And I was moving some things from a room, and the crew were in the other room. And I suddenly had this sort of, it was dark, prickles down my back, and I felt like I was being watched. And I sort of looked up, and there was a mirror, big mirror in front of me. Yeah, I wasn't looking at me. I was looking at Carlo's face, and I had a bit of a, whoa, what's going on? And then I realized the museum or the gallery had hung this painting on a mirror. So the rest of it was a mirror, but right in line with my face was Carlo's face. And it's an incredibly moving painting of Carlo, sort of almost, most of it's her face and her torso, and her body is ripped open, cracked open, and where her spine would be is a sort of almost like a Greek column, but it's all shattered. And that's obviously in reference to the fact that she had spent a lifetime of having back operations. She was very badly injured in her early 20s in a bus accident. Um, and so her column is all shattered, and she's got pins and tacks all stuck into her skin, obviously the pain, and there are tears down her face, and then the landscape behind her is all cracked, and it's incredible way of communicating pain
Yeah.
and a painful body. And I think I was saying to you, or that I always find it interesting that pain is something that so many of us experience, but we don't have the words to describe it. And doctors will say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how painful is it? And you just think, wow, is that all we've got?
Yeah.
As yeah, oh, it's a sharp pain or a throbbing pain, that's it. Whereas Carlo's entire life was painful and was experiencing pain, and that painting showed how well she could use art to communicate pain, because although there's tears going down her face, the sort of direct gaze that she's got with the view of that painting is quite defiant, almost,
Stillness,
of like,
that painting
yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And
And
again,
it
we were talking in the toilets, weren't we, of, Tracy Emin and her work. And, it
mm,
took me in the 90s, I didn't fully get Tracy Emin as I do now, and how important it is for these women communicating
yes,
pain and painful experiences, because both she and Frida Kahlo refer to motherhood or the lack of motherhood
lack of
in their
motherhood.
work as
Yeah.
well.
I did find the echoes of, Carlo in Emin's work, it yeah, incredible. So I was like you, I think I've only engaged with Emin's work recently, and I did, a couple of weekends ago, go to the, show in Tate Modern, and having just finished this film, you just realize across the decades there is the connection between these two women. And yeah, that, quite right. These are the things that women are dealing with, and we shouldn't have to deal with them quietly. Things like, infertility or constant miscarriage, or and both artists lay it bare and confront us with it, and and I think that's what art should do.
Yeah, and how amazing that they're both on at the Tate at the same time. I've got a family day booked in for August to see those
Oh,
exhibitions
it
together.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, and how, as you've said in the film, and when you did your talk at La Choza, the restaurant we were at in Brighton, Frida was relatively unknown in her lifetime, and certainly outside of Mexico. I think you said in the film she only had three lifetime, exhibitions.
Yeah, and she only had one in Mexico, and that was about 4 months before her death. So, for someone who had, um, incorporated so much of that, uh, place, that heritage, that, that world in her art, to only have been able to show her artwork in Mexico, just before she died, and she never knew that people would go on and love her art. That was I read, all her letters and all her diaries, and as part of researching this, and you realise she she just didn't think she was a particularly good artist. But that's all she had. That's what she wanted. That's how she saw herself. And yeah, I do find that incredibly sad. She'll have no idea how, look, I mean, h recently, I think one of her artworks sold at Sotheby's for something like 20, it was either 27 or 29 million, and which is the highest value of an artwork by a female artist, and
Amazing. Yeah.
it's gonna go higher and higher and higher, isn't it? She's just so sought after as an artist. And who knows? Is it for the right reasons? Is it because everyone wants a piece of her? I think as one of my interviewees says,
Mm.
there's a she's that interesting sort of character or interesting icon, isn't it? Is that people will appropriate her for what they want. And
Yeah, yeah. I heard Madonna's been quite a long lifetime
yeah,
collector. I think she had. I think the original of one of the I can't remember what the painting's called. The birthing picture. Where
yeah,
her legs are. As
yeah,
she goes into Madonna's house, which is very Madonna as a rebellious woman
yes,
herself.
exactly. Yeah, I did try and contact Madonna when I was making the first film of, "Please, can I film that work?" And, yeah, they don't let it go out. She doesn't let it go anywhere. I think she let it go somewhere once and, yeah, never again apparently. But and that's the thing, that's why it's honestly, if you get the opportunity to go to Tate Modern and see, I think there's 31 Carlo works in that exhibition, which is obviously also alongside about 180 works of more contemporary artists in the decades since her death that have this exhibition is showing how people have responded to her, both her and her artwork. And I think it's such a unique opportunity because it's very rare for people to let Carlo works travel.
Yeah.
And so for them to have got 31 Carlo works, including Broken Column, and I think My Nurse and I is there too, is, a once in a lifetime opportunity to see it in the UK.
Yeah, definitely. And you feature her diaries in the film. What else do they reveal about her and the complexities of, her life, her mind, her work?
I I would like to spend more time looking through those diaries, to be honest, because when Frida Kahlo died, Diego Rivera sort of took control of a lot of her belongings, and they were locked in the bathroom of the Blue House in where she was born and where she actually
Mm.
died
Have you
in
managed to get
Memphis.
there yet? Did you manage to go there?
Yeah, yeah, we did, and, oh, that's a whole other that was just an amazing when you walk into someone's house, sometimes you can really feel that person, and you could there. They've been brilliant, and it's really beautifully kept house with all of her belongings in it. You see all the trinkets she had, you see the bed that she, started her art career in, where she'd had an accident and her father had put a mirror. I'm looking up now, but a mirror in the canopy above her bed, and bought her a box of paints. And because she was just bedbound for months and months and months and months, and that's where
Yeah.
she learned to paint. So that house is incredible, and I. I would definitely encourage if anyone gets a chance to go to Mexico City, that really does.
I don't, because I've been twice and I've missed it both times. I'm like so
Oh,
heartbroken for various reasons. So it's still
it's
on my
really
list.
so when Diego Rivera died, he said that no one was allowed to open that room. I think it was for 40 years. It was something like that. Anyway, which is why there was another resurgence of interest in Frida around the time of there was that really great V&A exhibition with all of Frida's belongings and lipsticks and her a lot of her dresses and things like that. And
Yeah, I
around the
think I
time
went
that
to that and like her makeup compacts and
yeah,
yeah, I
and
remember, I think.
that had come about because suddenly there was access to all of her belongings again, and in there were her diaries, and they reveal a whole other side to her. And that's the thing. Sometimes you feel is it wrong that, she never ever intended those diaries to be read by anybody? They were incredibly private. That she just an outpouring of the agony of her relationship, the infidelities of Diego Rivera and the pain it caused her, and talking about her actual physical pain, but also it reveals that she was so well read and so politically minded, but so well read in terms of art history. And she's mentioning people like Bruegel, or mentioning El Greco, these European artists, old masters. I hate that word. Why are they masters?
Yeah, yeah,
Anyway,
me too.
yeah, but, you just realize, wow, what a mind, what an incredible mind. So part of me felt wrong reading her diaries,
Yeah,
but,
I can
yeah,
see
it
that.
was a lovely insight into, even more there was even more to this woman than I think people realized.
Yeah, and she was training to be a doctor, wasn't she? And
Yeah, she
similar
was.
to Lee, her father being interested in photography and giving her the
Yeah,
paints,
yeah,
had a real influence on how she moved forward. And I love, Diego Rivera, obviously massively famous in including in his lifetime, and I think kind of contributing to her being iconic in terms of you can find Frida in those massive murals that
yes,
he did in
yeah,
Mexico. But I love one of my favorite quotes of Frida's is "I am the artist and he is the child."
yes.
So she had some
And that
degree of awareness of how good she
she
was.
She did, and that came obviously with time. And again a really there's a woman called Ganit Ancori, who's one of the interviewees in the first film, and she talks really well about Frida's changing identity, really, or her perception of herself. And she uses three artworks of Frida's through her lifetime and show how she sees herself from this like little demure wife next to Rivera just after they've got married, where he's holding the palette. And then you see her in looking at or portraying herself as a failed mother, as Gani puts it, where she's just mourning her ability to hold a pregnancy. And then at the end, towards the end of her life, she paints herself holding the palette herself and on her own. And you kind of see that she realizes throughout her life the impact and her talent, and she gets to understand it, or that's what it feels like.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, and us as women, I've written a book actually about 7-year personal growth cycles that our genius, comes through these cycles, and we have to realize it because
Yeah,
particularly in her generation, we haven't had the role models that women are geniuses. As we said, the masters, are all
yeah,
a particular gender and
yeah.
often certain race as well. So we really have to push through to move into that acceptance and power.
I think that's so true. And I mean, I think there's so many wonderful things, certainly in the art world. I suppose I always refer to the art world of people now finally uncovering these incredible talents of women who had to fight harder to make time for their art, or to have access to their subjects to paint. So I did a film on Mary Cassatt. People just think Mary Cassatt painted nicey pictures of women and children, but then again, when you research it and you understand her life, you see that there's and that film I made for Exhibition on Screen tells the story of a misnamed painting in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, because people completely overlooked the symbolism in it of what Cassatt had painted. And that Cassatt was actually very involved in the suffragette movement, and the big sunflower on a woman's dress in there was actually the symbol of the suffragette movement in the US at the time. And yeah, that's been lost. That whole kind of that meaning of that painting has been lost until now, where people are looking again, and like people like Katie Hessel doing incredible work of, she wrote the book of The Story of Art Without Men. And you just think, wow, these amazing women throughout history have been missed again and again, but now they're coming to the fore. I think there's in Cardiff, Cardiff Museum at the moment, the National Museum of Wales has an exhibition of Gwen Johns, who well, again, beautiful paintings, beautiful artworks, um, by a woman who lived in the 1800s that just have been kind of forgotten or not noticed until now. So we're getting
Yeah.
all the lovely, brilliant opportunities to finally look at these artworks.
And
And
it's
I
so
think,
important, isn't it, that it's women telling those stories of other women
yes,
because we get it on a different depth. And I think we all have a certain grief that we've kind of missed out on these
yeah,
stories and the benefit, you know, that men have for understanding more of their narrative than
yeah,
we've had the privilege of, which is why I'm so grateful of growing up with the likes of Frida Kahlo and Lee Miller and knowing a little bit about
yeah.
them. I feel like that was a real privilege that I had.
I think that's it. And I think it's a duty to pass it on to our daughters, definitely. Of, sit up and take notice and spend time reading these stories or hearing these stories because it helps. It when we are maybe doubting ourselves or doubting our abilities, certainly at this age of life, I'm 53. You've got to you need people to look to be reminded that we're so incredibly capable of doing these things. And yeah, I think that's why I love studying people like Carlo and Cassatt and things like that. It's yeah, you've got
Yeah,
to.
bringing those stories into the world. Well, my niece is going to be coming to see the film with us for a girls'
Oh,
day out. She's 10. She has the same birthday as Frida Kahlo.
oh,
She's been a
brilliant.
lifelong fan. So,
Oh,
um,
that's really good to hear.
yeah, yeah. What's coming up for you next, and where can we find the film?
So obviously the Carlo film is out on the 19th of May. So that will be in cinemas all around the UK. And also the exhibition on screen website will you can find a screening there. So it'll find your nearest one. So I am now starting work on uh, there's an exhibition by Renoir that's currently in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris and is coming to the National Gallery in London. I love working with them. They're really great bunch there. And at first I thought, oh, Renoir, what do you know what I start every single film with? What
I
do
was
I
just going to say, I feel a theme coming, and then the
I
depth.
know, and I just think, "Oh, what?" It just get it just sort of, comes to me as like, "Okay, this one, this is the exhibition." But then I went to see the Musée d'Orsay one in Paris, last week, and it's about Renoir and love, and I'm obviously always looking for the other stories, and probably, to be fair, I'm always looking for the women's stories in there.
Yeah,
And so what I found really interesting about this, but again, people look at Renoirs and think, "Oh, bit twee, bit, nicey kind of impressionist work." But actually, um, he painted it looks at 20 years of his work in his early years, and he painted relationships, and he painted love, and it was at the time when relationships were beginning to change and the role of women and the opportunity for women to have relationships in a different way. Should I say open relationships? Maybe there was that bohemian kind of lifestyle where lots of the artists didn't marry but had very meaningful relationships for periods of time and then moved on. And it was when the whole kind of stiff upper lip kind of men would have their wife keep them at home and then go off and have affairs or sleep with prostitutes and things like that. That whole vibe was beginning to change. Things were loosening up, and it was the time of the Moulin Rouge, and it's quite an exciting kind of free love, sort of sexually liberating period of time. But it's looking within Renoir's paintings of you can start to read them a bit differently because
yeah,
he
amazing.
had many relationships, and many of the women that he you know was with went some of them went on to, like, Susan Valendon, very interesting character, became an artist in her own right. It's just sort of meeting Paris at this particular point, but looking at love and relationships at
Yeah.
the time. And so I'm quite excited to go into that.
Amazing. And you've done Clint and the Kiss as well, haven't you?
That was wonderful. That was one that I actually just said to Exhibition on Screen, I have to make this film because I had that painting on my wall as a student. And I realised that so many people did, but again, we didn't know much about it. So Klimt and the Kiss, I loved making that film because it was taking one painting and almost using it as a portal to step through and look at Vienna at the time it was painted. So it was like doing a cultural history, social history, looking at Klimt's life, looking at the treatment of women, looking at how he portrayed different women, whether they were society women or the sort of working class women that he'd grown up among. So I loved making that film. That was good.
Oh, amazing. It's been so amazing to have you, Ali. And I love that you're threading women's stories through these important works, even when, we're not talking about a female artist.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to dive into more of your work. And thank you so much for being with us on She Rebel Radio and collaborating with Brighton on the Inside. We're really looking forward to sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. And I really hope that people enjoy the film and, get to understand all the layers of our wonderful Frida Kahlo.
This episode is in collaboration with Brighton on the Inside, an independent and curated lifestyle magazine. Thank you for listening to She Rebel Radio. If this episode has inspired you, please pass it on and share with at least one other incredible woman. Don't forget to also hit subscribe and leave us a review. And if you're ready, you can find out more about you and your genius over on my new website, thegeniuswheel.com.